Hey, so what's the best way for a fandom to create a community? This might sound odd coming from me, but I absolutely love a crack shipping. Have you ever entered into a fandom and seen one of those fan couplings where anybody with an ounce of knowledge about the source material would say, "Are these people completely out of their minds? These two don't fit together at all." Well, that's a crack ship. A headcanon relationship where the two characters have such a toxic dynamic that half the time it wouldn't even be good writing to watch it actually become part of the series canon. On the other hand, there's something to these super cringe and toxic relationships that is really intriguing, and I think it reveals a lot about a person's psyche for how they view or identify with those characters. Okay, yeah, I'm really not one for romance. However, I think people's relationships are kind of interesting from the outside looking in. This can be amorous relationships, platonic ones, or even something in between. And shipping is one of the best ways that you, as the community, gets to communicate your thoughts, feelings, and desires with the authors and creators of your favorite stories. What does it all mean, shipping? Shipping, or a ship in this context, refers to relationships, usually romantic relationships that may or may not even be sexual in nature. And there's actually a lot more history behind the idea of shipping than one might think. Consider a lot of mythological tales and the interwoven web of gods, heroes, and mythical creatures and how they interact. Some Greek stories acknowledge the torrid love affair between Aphrodite and Ares, for example. Others only recognize her marriage to Hephaestus, god of the forge. In fact, sometimes it's said that the greatest lie Disney ever told was portraying Zeus as a loving family man, but that in and of itself is Disney creating their own kind of fan shipping. Disney may have created a license to use their version of Heracles, or Hercules as it's often mispronounced, but the character is still part of a greater culture that has used those stories for other means ever since. In fact, some historians tend to think that several of the challenges presented to Yeshua in the Christian Bible were actually based on the 12 labors of Heracles that were foisted upon him by his stepmother and namesake Hera, Queen of the Gods. Achilles and Patroclus is another classic version of a ship, and this one has actually been debated by historians as early as Aristotle. Even Alexander the Great. Netflix released a documentary not long ago that virtually begins with a scene of Alexander and his lover Hephaestion within the first 8 minutes. Something that really raised the blood pressure of a few people who do not understand history or, honestly, how queer it is. And now, before I go further into this, obligatory mention to say that whether or not we should call Alexander the Great bisexual, gay, or whatever is anachronistic, because they didn't have terms like this. They did use the terms eromanos and erestes, but this was akin to using the terms like uke and seme in yaoi culture, or top and bottom in more modern, broad terminology. And it's very interesting, honestly. Not every creator has hard-baked rules about relationships in their stories. In many ways, shipping and fandom allows for more marginalized enjoyers of these works, namely women, queer folk, and people of color, to wedge in their own representations where there previously was none. And this brings back to two very important examples of fandom that have wedged a niche that sort of become the accepted canon, or at least gotten positive response from the original creators. The first is James T. Kirk and Sachin Tagai Spock. Yep. So before we had the term ship or shipping, there was a branch of fiction that developed actually around the concept of Kirk and Spock. This is called slash fiction. The slash comes from the backslash character being between the characters' names. So this means Kirk slash Spock is usually abbreviated as K/S or even Spirk. Oh gods. Splash games are so cringe, but they're hilarious. Splash games are those weird little mashups of portmanteaus that people do with the names of people in relationships, like Brangelina, or Skulder from the X-Files, or Bumblebee from Ruby. What would you call this ship? How about Meryl? Wait, no. Aimtin? Nope, that sucks. Meryl it is. I don't care. Anyway, slash fiction is a genre of fanfiction that focuses on romantic or sexual relationships between fictional characters, usually of the same sex. I say usually because that was the origin of slash fiction, and it started with gay male relationships. Later, a branch specifically for lesbian fiction was introduced called femslash, but many heterosexual fans have began using slash fic terms to describe their OTPs, or original true pairings. The concept of an original true pairing is pretty simple. That's the one ship that you would unironically sync with, no matter what anyone said to the contrary, even the creators themselves, and you continue to fan squeal over any assumed moment of attraction or affection between them, even if you'd have to make it yourself. I say it that way because that's exactly what gay men in the 1970s did. Back then, Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek was hugely popular. So popular, in fact, that many people started speculating romance between many of the ship's crew. But one of them that stood above all else in the fandom was Kirk and Spock. The chemistry between the two of them being so different, yet they understood the other on such a deeply emotional level that it inspired a critically under-repressed demographic of Star Trek fans to read their own experiences and struggle with being queer in a time where it was not acceptable into their favorite characters. In fact, as of 1998, most academic studies of slash fiction focused on K/S as one of their longest-lived and most popular slash fics. Not to mention, one of the first according to Henry Jenkins, an American media scholar with a decorated list of credentials. He's also considered one of the earliest scholars to actually study slash fiction. The relationship started by fans actually got so much attention that the novelization of Star Trek, the motion picture, Gene Roddenberry himself created a Vulcan term, Tahila, to describe Kirk and Spock's relationship. A term, he said, could be translated as friend, brother, or even lover, depending on context. And a footnote in the same book actually sees him address the rumor of Spock and Kirk's homoerotic undertones. Quote, I was never aware of this lover's rumor, although I have been told that Spock encountered it several times. Apparently, he always dismissed it with his characteristic lifting of his right eyebrow, which usually connotated disbelief and or annoyance. As for myself, although I have no moral or other objections to physical love of any of its many earthly, alien, and mixed forms, I always found my best gratification in that creature, woman. Also, I would not like to be thought of as being so foolish that I would select a love partner who only came into sexual heat only once every 7 years. This dude's never tried to date an asexual before. But it's also interesting. We mentioned Alexander and Hephaestion earlier. We're coming back to that now. See, Roddenberry also talked about fans seeing a possible parallel between Hephaestion and Alexander in Kirk and Spock. Here he says, yes, there is certainly some of that, certainly with love undertones, deep love. The only difference being the Greek ideal. We never suggested in the series, the physical love between the two. We certainly had the feeling that the affection was sufficient for that. If that were the particular style of the 23rd century, he looks thoughtful. That's very interesting. I never thought of that before. Similarly, he said, I definitely designed it as a love relationship, and I hope that for men who have been afraid of such relationships, that they, meaning Kirk and Spock, would encourage them to be able to feel love and affection, true affection, love, friendship, and deep respect. That was the relationship I tried to draw. I think I also tried to draw a feeling of belief that very few of us are complete unto ourselves. It's quite a lovely thing, where two halves make a whole. So you see, part of the allure of the slash fiction at the time was that Gene Roddenberry had designed these characters with a relationship in mind, but not necessarily a romantic one. He had no problem with it because he understood that times could progress, that people would get more accepting of these sorts of love relationships possibly in the future. The second example that I just had to mention comes from fem/fiction, the one that I talked about earlier. Inarguably, if Kirk and Spock is the definitive male/genre, there's only one coupling worthy of fem/ in my mind. Gabrielle and Xena, Warrior Princess. Back in a 2016 interview with Entertainment Weekly, the show's executive producer and co-creator Rob Tapert said, quote, "We didn't really ever want to get them 100% together for a very strange reason. There was Ares, God of War, who was played by Kevin Smith, and we loved that. We did not want to give up the hold the character had over Xena, and the enjoyment we had of telling stories of Xena and Ares. So as much as we liked that Xena and Gabrielle were two people who were the best of friends, and perhaps intimate friends, we never wanted to give up on Ares."
That's heterosexual privilege!
That feels like a huge letdown, honestly. Sort of like the show's creators realized the awesome potential and recognized the necessity among lesbians for Xena/Gabrielle ship to be seen as series canon. I suppose it would end up being my own way of shipping them to say I feel that Xena may have realized the danger that actually allowing herself to love Gabrielle may have presented her should Ares, a literal god, decide to interfere with their relationship. It's something that even the character performer Lucy Lawless talked about in interviews from time to time. Quote, "She felt she was irredeemable. That friendship between Xena and Gabrielle transmitted some message of self-worth, deservedness, and honor to people who felt very marginalized, so it had a lot of resonance with the gay community." Similarly, Renee O'Connor, who played Gabrielle, says she thinks the show made baby steps toward change, and the show's lesbian undertones wouldn't be hidden today. Quote, "I think the opportunity to be forthright is more evident in all media now. I just think it would definitely be embraced wholeheartedly. I'm grateful that people aren't looking backward. They just move forward. People have to break ground, and if that's what Xena was at the time, yeah, it came out at the right moment. We were very aware there was only so much we could do, because it was a show on network television. So anytime Rob would push the envelope as much as he could, he had to work within certain guidelines. Before we started shooting Xena, we shot the material that we were going to use to create the opening title sequence with," Rob Tapert said similarly. "The studio was so concerned that it would be perceived as a lesbian show that they would not allow us to have Xena and Gabrielle in the same frame of the opening titles." Showrunner R.J. Stewart knew this as well. He said they were careful not to exploit the relationship or pander to the audience lest they feel taken advantage of. That dynamic was also not lost on Universal Television. There are more recent examples also of fan shippings that have actually changed the course of the story overall. For instance, Naruto Uzumaki and Hinata Hyuga. The mangaka's original view for Naruto was that he would remain single even after the story ended, but the fan reception of the idea that Hinata and Naruto should end the story as lovers gained a dangerous amount of traction within the fandom, and such that Kishimoto himself decided to put the couple together rather than alienate the fan base he'd worked so hard to create. And so really, we have the Naru Hina shippers to thank for Boruto. Good job, guys. Quick spoiler warning for the first season of Hazbin Hotel, but Serpentius and Cherry Bomb are another example of /fic turned canon. In Amazon's recent Hazbin Hotel, the character of Serpentius is a snake demon who works a little like a mad scientist, whereas Cherry Bomb is designed more after a 1980s punk rock aesthetic. Pentius was originally supposed to be just a one-off villain played for comic relief. However, between the release of the pilot 4 years ago and the first release was just aired, fans were so intrigued with the idea of Cherry Bomb and Serpentius ending up together that the creator, Vivian Medrano, went ahead and wrote it into the canon. Moments like these seem to indicate, at least for me, a deeper connection between the creator and the audience. It shows an investment from those who are enjoying the art, along with often a gratitude from the creator that, if nothing else, demonstrates a thankfulness. Sometimes, like with the case of Gene Roddenberry, it can even help us to think of our own characters from a perspective we may have not considered. And in that way, it can help us understand a little bit more about the world around us. Of course, not everyone is going to accept certain ships, and there have been cases where creators or even actors have spoken out against certain ships. The Fox's series Sleepy Hollow was a show that aired for 4 seasons, based on the legend of Sleepy Hollow, but this story saw the character of Ichabod Crane not as a school teacher, but as a man who cut the head from death himself and woke up suddenly in the year 2013 to stop an apocalypse from happening. Throughout the show's inception, the audience watched with bated breath every time Ichabod and the potential love interest Abby Mills was on screen. Such was the interest in Ichabod and Abby's relationship that it caused a fervorous uproar, and just about every interview or fan meeting brought up the topic until Abby's actress, Nicole Beharie, actually started getting creeped out by the fans' obsession and outright asked for it to stop. A lot of people seem to believe that this may have had something to do with her leaving the show thereafter, but that's also not the case. Nicole Beharie was prompted to leave Sleepy Hollow primarily due to an autoimmune disease, which she announced on social media that was one of the reasons she quit the show. Another reason happened to come out later. The actress said in 2020 that she was treated unfairly when she got sick, and that the producers saw non-white characters as expendable. Beharie further said that leaving got her labeled as problematic, and she struggled to find roles after leaving. Well, the show suffered tremendously without her. The interpersonal dynamic between Crane and Mills was the driving force of the series, and after Beharie's departure, the series dramatically changed as it's relocated to Washington, D.C. and introduced 2 different characters in an effort to find Crane a new partner, but just created chaos. The changes were a massive overcorrection to try and make up for Beharie's absence, and no one was surprised when Sleepy Hollow was cancelled after season 4. It just wasn't the series the fans had fallen in love with anymore. I watched some of this show. I remember really enjoying the dynamic that Tom Meissen and Nicole Beharie brought to the screen. And I understand why the shipping of Ichabod and Abby was also so important over Ichabod's canonical marriage to Katrina Van Tassel, played by Katja Winter. And that's because, especially during the time, women of color were drastically underrepresented in media, especially as characters who were seen as the main love interest of the male main character, unless the show in question was specifically geared toward an audience with people of color as the primary cast. Abby was strong, independent, yeah, sure, but she also wasn't just played as a trope or a token, and in the end it's a shame that Nicole Beharie was treated by the network when her character was so pivotal to the series. Hell, she's the first person Ichabod meets in the future. Of course she was going to be pivotal. It's like Henry Jenkins once said back in 1988. Quote, "Fandom is a vehicle of marginalized subcultures, women, the young, gays, etc., and assuming for people of color as well, to pry open space for their cultural concerns with dominant representation. It is a way of appropriating media texts and rereading them in a way that serves different interests, a way of transforming mass culture into popular culture." And so when bigots say things like, they're appropriating X-Men from us, in the case of Mystique and Destiny's relationship being made canon, and Mystique being reimagined as Kurt Wagner's father, as was the original intent before Azazel's involvement, it's important to remember that this came out of necessity for marginalized groups, women, lesbians, and even transgender people, to see themselves represented in media that was clearly meant to be a critique of such othering. And it's very clear from the inception what X-Men was about, and Stan spelled it out plainly in one of his soapbox editorials. Quote, "Let's lay it on the line. Bigotry and racism are among the deadliest social ills plaguing the world today. But unlike a team of costume supervillains, they can't be halted with a punch on the snoot or a zap from a ray gun. The only way to destroy them is to expose them, to reveal them for their insidious evils they really are. The bigot is an unreasoning hater, one who hates blindly, fanatically, indiscriminately. If his hang-up is black men, he hates all black men. If a redhead once offended him, he hates all redheads. If some foreigner beat him out to a job, he's down on all foreigners. He hates people he's never seen, people he's never known, with equal intensity, with equal venom. Now, we're not trying to say it's unreasonable for one human being to bug another, but although anyone has the right to dislike another individual, it's totally irrational, patently insane, to condemn an entire race, to despise an entire nation, to vilify an entire religion. Sooner or later, we must learn to judge each other on our own merits. Sooner or later, if a man is ever going to be worthy of his destiny, we must fill our hearts with tolerance. For then, and only then, will we be truly worthy of the concept that man was created in the image of God, a God who calls all of us his children. While I don't know how much I personally agree with the concept of one singular, all-loving God, considering the lengths that many Christian missionaries went to obscure and erase cultures that were far more ancient, rewrite their cultures, and obfuscate queerness and different genders as something foreign, wrong, or pagan, meaning ignorant, he definitely made his point. X-Men is a call-out against racism, against queerphobia, transphobia, and all other forms of hatred. It's a story where Mystique and Destiny can be seen as just another couple of parents, where Bobby Drake can be in love with Christian Frost, the brother of Emma Frost, and where politicians who pass harmful legislation aimed at destroying a marginalized group of people can literally be turned into a puddle of goo. And I hope I've made our point abundantly clear in this project. We want you to be able to read your experiences in our characters. We'd like you to even come up with your own ships. Maybe you just like the idea of Martin and Imel, Madeline and Shane, or the other way around. Why not ship Martin with Tam, Shane with Patty, or Cassandra and Edna? Did Matthias as a bard ever share his bed with Patrick and his wife? Maybe. We won't say for sure. But if you've had the thought, well, there's no wrong answers here, and we'd love to know your perspectives in the comment section below. Let's take this opportunity to turn Tales of Atonement into a popular culture that carves out a specific niche of unrepentantly queer characters, or polyamorous hetero triads, love and relationships that transcends minute differences like race, gender, a story that anyone can see themselves in. And there might be a little more insight into the specifics of characters' relationships after episode 4 rolls around. A lot of good stuff coming up for you in the future, so ring my bell, like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my videos. Art for this week's project was provided by Hiko on Fiverr. Check the link down in the description if you'd like to commission them. Patreon is the best way to support this channel. Not only are you supporting us, but then we turn around and change that money into great art, music, voiceovers, comics, maybe even merch like shirts, hats, or plushies one day. But you'll also get access to the Tales of Atonement coloring pages, the Monomyth comic book, and even the unpublished scripts so that you can read the story way ahead of time. Check the link if you want to look into that. Some of our great patrons include Shadow Fox, Arya Gamari, Charles Tam, Jace Morland, and Lunder Lumen. Thanks for watching.